The boogeymen of the Commonwealth, the single greatest threat to human continuity, soulless automaton, Fred. The third-generation synths produced by the Institute go by many names and give substance to many of the collective fears of the Commonwealth, but are they really the danger to all of mankind that they are made out to be, or are they the unfortunate scapegoats of negative public opinion and propaganda? If you are interested in finding out the truth, then crack open your assigned Institute food packet and settle into a sturdy office chair, because I'm Gray, you're watching Gray Gaming, and today we're busting open the 5 most prevalent myths surrounding the third-generation synth. The first assumption many people believe to be true regarding Gen 3 synths is that their design has changed little in the 58 years between the events of Fallout 4 and the Broken Mask incident, which marks the first confirmed existence of the Gen 3 synth. In May of 2229, a man who identified himself as Carter entered the Diamond City market and, after spirited conversation with the locals over a few drinks, simply drew his weapon and began gunning down innocent civilians until a hail of bullets fired by Diamond City security finally brought Carter crashing to the ground, with a large portion of his face blown away, revealing a mechanical skeletal structure beneath. This Terminator-esque description of these early Gen 3 synths is typically how many tend to think of the Gen 3 synth. However, the reality is that the Gen 3 program has seen massive advances, and through gradual improvements, the mechanical skeleton was replaced with bone, central processor replaced with a biological brain, and virtually every bodily function replaced with a perfectly replicated organic construct based on human DNA. The original construction method, which appears to be organic flesh draped over a mechanical skeleton, has been completely replaced by a living, breathing collection of organs and tissues that are assembled or grafted to one another in order to create a biological machine which some argue are sentient beings, assembled to resemble the human form and based on human DNA. This level of advancement is why you can't simply wave a metal detector or shove a needle in someone to determine if they are synth or human, as the only indication that someone is a synth is a small cluster of cybernetic implants co-located with the brain inside the skull. As recently as 2277, there were still significant cybernetic systems included in some synths, as evidenced by components removed from synth A3-21 without catastrophically damaging the unit, though the act was assumed to be impossible by the head of the SRB, Dr. Zimmer. However, by the late 2280s, the notion of a Gen 3 synth being a bullet-resistant cyborg is unfortunately outdated, with modern Gen 3 synths being just as frail as humans, minus some intentional genetic meddling to make them less susceptible to known diseases or improve the average level of physical fitness. One caveat to this is the addition of a second cybernetic implant installed in synths destined for the Courser program, designed to allow coursers access to the molecular relay system. The addition of this implant during production, as well as additional genetic modification projects, suggests that the fearsome reputation of coursers is not due solely to their training, but is also the result of decades of research and improvements to the Gen 3 synth design that are specifically reserved for synths purpose-built for the Courser program, as opposed to general labor units. This is a huge misconception that largely stems from the stories of synths replacing humans on the surface. Many people tend to engage in a bit of hyperbole when it comes to reports of Institute abductions and synth infiltrators, which eventually leads to claims that every Institute synth is modeled after a specific human who has been abducted by the Institute. Now, this is problematic for several reasons. The first is that unless you intend to actually infiltrate some organization or group that person was a part of, then specifically modeling a synth after that exact individual is completely unnecessary. It stands to reason that the majority of synths would be constructed either using models already on file, or if physical differentiation was a concern, they could combine models in much the same way that human reproduction combines elements of each parent's genetic code into a distinct new human. In reality, all synths are based on the DNA of a single human individual, with differences in appearance, physical fitness, even sex created through genetic manipulation. Now, this theory does allow for the possibility that all synths in the Institute were originally infiltration units and have simply fulfilled their mission, were submitted to reclamation, and are now tasked with performing general labor tasks, which does sound somewhat plausible, but this is also unlikely for the simple reason that synths are not necessarily programmed like a machine. You can't just hook it up to the Wi-Fi and grab a coffee while it downloads a whole new skill set. You actually have to train synths to perform a new task. Even purpose-built coursers require years of rigorous training. The existence of railroad memory wipes and replacements does mean that it's theoretically possible to simply install memory memories of performing these tasks and receiving this training, but it appears that memory insertion is entirely unused by the Institute, evidenced once again by the fact that coursers must spend years in training rather than just being hooked up and having that training downloaded. More than likely, in order to place an infiltration unit, the Institute simply observes a suitable target and later captures, interrogates, and constructs a psychological profile of them. The results are then provided to the infiltration unit constructed and trained to take their place, a likely reason why synth infiltrators don't always succeed in their deception, as they do not truly possess their persona's memories. With this information, or rather supposition, in mind, the idea that all synths are either former or active infiltrators is flawed, as once their mission is completed, it would take considerable time and energy to reclaim and retrain a synth that was constructed specifically for infiltration and which intentionally exhibits traits similar to a specific flawed human to perform the duties of a research assistant or heavy equipment operator. If you take note of many of the Gen 3 synths within the Institute, and with the exception of a small domestic servant model designed as a single test case, the majority of Gen 3s do not perform strictly unskilled labor. Most janitorial or customer service oriented tasks are still being performed by the aging Gen 1 and Gen 2 models. As such, it stands to reason that Gen 3 synths are entrusted with more complex tasks and would fall more into the realm of skilled labor rather than unskilled, and as such require significant education, training, and possibly even genetic modification before they can perform those tasks. The idea that all synths were created based on the model of a specific individual human can't be completely discounted, but it seems far more likely that in much the same way that coursers and infiltrators are purpose-built, synths destined for other tasks would also be tailored to their intended vocation, with infiltration units simply being recycled after their missions are complete. Many individuals assume that Paladin Danse is an Institute infiltrator designed to spy on and possibly help destroy the Brotherhood of Steel. However, this is unlikely for a number of reasons. According to both Proctor Quinlan and Elder Arthur, Dance's identity as a synth was discovered via a list of missing synths recovered from the Institute, and Dance's DNA matches the file for a synth designated M7-97. The fact that this is a list of missing synths suggests that Dance's actions are not being dictated by the Institute, which has no knowledge of his whereabouts, and that his actions and motivations are not congruent with any specific mission. However, the more often cited evidence that Danse is an infiltrator placed within the BOS as a replacement for a living human Danse is that Danse is known to have recounted events from his past to the sole survivor, including memories of growing up in Rivet City within the capital wasteland and later in life of joining the BOS along with his friend Cutler. These relationships and memories are cited as proof that Danse was a real person with real relationships with those around him, and that he had to have been replaced with a synth doppelganger at a later date. However, artificial memories are often added to synths after the Railroad performs a mind wipe in order to alleviate the obvious suspicions that would begin to form if there was a sudden influx of individuals in a given region with amnesia, a fairly rare mental condition. Therefore, just because a synth has memories doesn't necessarily mean that those memories are real. More than likely, M7-97 escaped to the capital wasteland with the aid of the Railroad and then received a mind wipe complete with new memories of someone named Danse. This exact scenario was confirmed to have transpired in the case of escaped courser A3-21, who was given the memories of a deceased vault participant, assumed the name of Harkness, and went on to become the chief of Rivet City's security force. Another commonality between both Harkness and Danse was a complete lack of awareness of their true nature. They truly believed that they were humans who had lived full lifetimes until presented with evidence to the contrary. This cannot be said for synths that are actively executing missions on the surface on behalf of the Institute, with Mayor McDonough overtly providing information packets to the SRB, the botched infiltrator Art willingly admitting that he is there to replace an existing human named Art, and Roger Warwick requesting assistance from the Institute due to the assumption that his identity as a synth has been discovered by his employee. All of this evidence would seem to accumulate with the conclusion that Danse is not an Institute infiltrator assigned to the BOS, but rather is the unwitting victim of circumstance, as he escaped the Institute, had his memories removed and replaced with artificial ones to protect his identity, and then joined the Brotherhood of Steel out of genuine conviction, only to be labeled a spy and traitor when his true identity was discovered. There is a lot of conflicting information out there about synths. Oftentimes, individuals will simply hear one side of the conflicting information and automatically assume it to be undisputed fact, sort of like politics, leading to many misconceptions about synth behavior and biology. Let's take a few of these comments at face value. Synths cannot get fat, do not require any sleep, are completely immune to disease, and do not require food. These are all assertions made by one Dr. Max Loken, one of the scientists who works in the robotics lab. This may seem to be a reasonable source of information. I mean, he builds synths for a living. He should know quite a bit about their capabilities, right? Well, sitting just a few feet away from where Loken stands around all day is a terminal filled with research notes. In it, we can find notes regarding a project that is aiming at increasing the resistance of certain models of synths to certain diseases. Why would synths require increased resistance to something to which they already are completely immune? While we never see synths gaining or losing weight, we also don't see anyone else in Fallout 4 do that. Fallout 4 simply doesn't have a Grand Theft Auto-esque mechanic where you get chonky if you eat too many burgers and don't use a treadmill enough. Thank Adam. Last thing I need is for my in-game avatar to develop the same physique I have in real life. Anyway, back to the synths. There are a set of behaviors that synths are programmed with which simulate human self-preservation behavior. They are known to sometimes comment that they are feeling sleepy, are getting hungry, and even older gen synths like Nick Valentine have been known to ruminate as to why the Institute felt it was necessary to design them to feel pain. In short, these are all biological indicators that signal to the individual that it is time to perform a necessary task in order to facilitate self-preservation. Pain lets you know that something is wrong, which could result in physical damage if not corrected. Hunger means that there is a dietary discrepancy that is preventing proper cell development, which is why you can sometimes eat huge amounts of junk food and still be hungry because your body needs a specific nutrient which you aren't getting from eating 3 boxes of Blamco mac and cheese. Sometimes your body just wants a mute fruit and a carrot. Drowsiness or sleepiness are usually signals that your brain needs, well, sleep. Additional behaviors beyond reported sensations are the fact that Dance, Curie, and even Nick require beds when assigned to settlement, suggesting an actual need to sleep. Additionally, Alan Benet has noted rapid eye movements or REM sleep and indications of dreaming in his domestic servant model of Gen 3 synth, which he has nicknamed Eve, which I just want to say it's bad enough that she got stuck with that face, is the first ever domestic servant synth, and then she gets assigned to a weirdo that watches her sleep. Poor Eve. Gen 3 synths, for some unknown reason, also really enjoy eating fancy lad snack cakes, which is only tangentially related to this discussion, but I thought it was quirky and interesting regardless. This wide collection of anecdotal evidence regarding the synth's biology suggests that Max Loken is either gravely mistaken regarding synths' physical requirements, is attempting to make synths sound like a much greater technological achievement than they already are, or is simply an ignoramus who should be completely discounted out of hand. Like many things in Fallout and in real life, the truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Another common misconception or assumption based on a single statement taken out of context is a statement that an Institute scientist makes in a passing conversation with her husband, where she confides that she is struggling with the ethics of creating a child synth because, quote, he will never get to grow up, unquote. Now, many people take this statement to mean that synths are genetically immortal, immune to aging. However, there could be many possible meanings to this statement. First and foremost, if we assume that the statements regarding synths' inability to gain weight beyond an intended baseline is true and consider that all previous Gen 3 synths were produced as full-grown individuals, then it makes sense that synths do not possess the capacity for physical development. The genetic process of replacing dead cells is quite different from the process that allows for human growth. To replace cells faster than death, to enlarge organs, bones, and tissues at an even rate that eventually ends once a mature state has been reached, is a biological hurdle far beyond the ability to simply maintain an organic construct indefinitely. Therefore, he will never get to grow up could simply mean that he would forever possess the physical dimensions, voice, and to a certain extent the appearance of a child. In short, growing up is very different from growing old. Another possible interpretation of he will never get to grow up is that his personality will never be able to mature beyond its current stage, and while he's certainly an intelligent kid capable of tinkering and building laser rifles and stuff, there would be an eventual limit to how far his personality would be able to mentally develop due to the simple limitations of working with an artificial brain and the amount of brain matter that is lost due to the additional presence of the synth cybernetics cluster. There is just a finite amount of information that can be stored in a human, or in this case an artificial human brain, and much of what's in Sean's skull is the same cluster of cybernetics that all Gen 3 synths have. Limited storage equals limited avenues for maturity. A third possible interpretation is that as a prototype, Sean will likely be disposed of once the experiment has been concluded. Synths are, after all, considered by the Institute to be nothing more than machines to which certain tasks can be outsourced. As a machine with the same physical capabilities of a prepubescent boy, rather than a fully grown adult, Sean would have limited utility and would have little practical application outside of the parameters of the experiment in which he was constructed. Janet Thompson's trepidation may serve purely as a concern that they are playing with the concept of creating a being that is truly innocent only to destroy it once it no longer serves their purposes. None of these possible interpretations negates the possibility of geriatrics, the final stage of biological life. Synths are artificial constructs, but they are still comprised of living cells constructed based on human DNA, which is not immune from the inevitable march of old age. The eventuality that cells will slowly begin to exhibit degraded structure or stop replicating entirely, leading to the inevitable loss of the machine due to natural causes, cannot be discounted. There is simply no evidence that synths will not eventually begin to show graying or thinning hair, wrinkling skin, brittle bones, or other signs of geriatrics. In fact, we see examples of synths that exhibit some or all of these features, though it's unclear if they were simply built to that specification or if they really have begun to age. As a result, there is no reason to assume that Sean wouldn't eventually show these same traits, just in a 4-foot 6-inch tall package. As some are likely to point out, the Institute has experimented with technology to increase human longevity, and indeed, the Institute operative Kellogg is over a century old, yet still possesses the physical condition capable of carrying out combat operations. However, as far as we know, all of the technology that extended Kellogg's lifespan is delivered and maintained through cybernetic implants, which, as we have already pointed out, have nearly been completely phased out of the Gen 3 synth design. Continued research in the area of fountain of youth type projects was strictly prohibited by the director of the Institute, and as such, there is not a lot of evidence to suggest that synths would have a lifespan significantly higher than virtually any human that spends their life in the same environments. Since it was never addressed in terminals, conversations, or other media, it is unclear if synths are sterile. Multiple sources state that they are anatomically identical to humans with their current iteration, which should go without saying would include reproductive organs. But whether they're shooting blanks or actually capable of having children with other synths, or since they're based on human DNA even with humans, remains to be seen. If they are capable of reproduction, then it would stand to reason that gestation would be similar to humans. However, the statements that he will never grow up, paired with they cannot gain weight beyond an established baseline, would suggest that synth reproduction would be difficult without true human DNA being present in the offspring in order to facilitate the biological processes of human development and maturation. The final misconception regarding synth biology is the assumption of players that synths can be manufactured extremely easily and incredibly rapidly due to the processes we witness in the robotics lab. However, and this is just a personal theory, this is not likely to be the actual case. This manufacturing process is likely sped up to allow players to observe the entire process from beginning to end without growing bored. In the span of a few real-world minutes or a couple in-game hours, a new synth can be assembled from scratch, but if you pay attention to the finished product, it's just the exact same synth being manufactured over and over again, a synth model which is never encountered anywhere else in the Institute. If they were manufacturing this one model over and over again that rapidly, shouldn't we be seeing literally hundreds or even thousands of synths with this exact face all over the Institute and on the surface? Additionally, due to limited resources, namely electricity rationing, that they have to work with, it is likely that manufacturing would be limited to an as-needed basis. In reality, due to these concerns and paired with the relative light numbers of actual Gen 3 synths we see, the true process of manufacturing likely takes days, weeks, or possibly even months, which actually could serve as the basis for a quest, sort of like Liberty Reprimed but for building a synth. I'll address that in a different video. If you're enjoying the video so far, a quick trip into VATS to target the like button would be a huge help to the channel. It's painless, easy, and viewer engagement is a metric we use to determine the type of content that you, the viewer, are interested in. Please, thank you, and now on to number 5. So this is the big one that you often hear from the Steel Bros. Synths represent an existential threat to humanity. Machines that think, that have free will or something approximating free will, that don't need sleep, that don't need food, that will multiply out of control unless stopped, that could choose to wage war on humans at any moment and wipe them out for good. But given what we've learned so far, that entire way of thinking is obviously flawed. This line of thought is based on the typical sci-fi trope of machines eventually rising up against their creators. However, strictly speaking, each of those franchises vilify machines that have objective, significant, and inherent advantages over humans. The current iteration of Gen 3 synths can be killed just as easily as any human, whether by trauma or radioactive exposure. Synths do not appear to have any speed or strength advantages over humans on average. While one lone scientist claims they don't need food or sleep, evidence gained through observing multiple Gen 3 synths would seem to fairly conclusively debunk those claims. While some may fear that they are immortal, this is once again based on a single offhand remark made by a single scientist to her spouse rather than found in any official documentation or scientific journal. Many point to the existence of the synth control chip for justification that synths are inherently more dangerous than humans, as anyone can simply use a recall code, issue an order, and now a synth that was completely loyal minutes ago can now be ordered to do anything: sabotage defenses, kill a faction's leader, kidnap a high-value individual. You get the picture. However, this appears to show a misunderstanding of the capabilities of synths under recall status. In all cases of recalled synths that we are able to witness, the actual type and number of commands that can be issued are extremely limited. In the case of A321, the synth lost virtually all of its higher thought processes and motor skills and defaulted to a basic follow pattern as it began to walk behind Dr. Zimmer on his way back to the Institute. In the case of the Minuteman turned Raider Gabriel, an escaped synth who received a railroad mind wipe, he too lost much of his higher thought processes and was simply frozen in place, allowing him to be collected using the molecular relay. The child synth Sean, when recalled, behaves nearly identically to Gabriel, simply shutting down and apparently falling asleep while still standing up. The thing is that all those actions that strike fear into those who worry about synth infiltrators each require significant reasoning skills, fine motor control, and an actual desire to carry out the task. While the third element can be removed through use of the recall code and activating the single remaining cluster of cybernetic implants in the skull, there is still extremely limited computational capability within that cluster. Most of what makes a synth indistinguishable from a person is controlled via the biological brain, not the cybernetic cluster. Expecting the synth to have all of the same capabilities after recall is really wishful thinking at best, and in the best of cases is simply a means of rendering the synth harmless rather than turning them into a compliant killing machine. In truth, the only plausible advantage that synths possess is not a trait of the synths themselves, but of the Institute. Synths could infiltrate the Brotherhood of Steel or regional governments or any organization they wish and destabilize or sow chaos throughout the wasteland. However, few synths actually appear to do this by choice and rather are designed specifically by the Institute to perform such missions, and it's not like humans are completely incapable of infiltration either, as evidenced by the sole survivor's ability to pursue BOS, Railroad, or even Minuteman interests while inside the Institute. The possibility exists that synths could be replaced far more rapidly than any soldier, but again, that's a capability of the robotics lab, not of synths themselves, and it's possible that the speed in which synths can be manufactured could be overblown. It's with this basic logic that synths themselves do not represent any danger to humanity any more so than any human also represents a danger to humanity. Possessing nearly all the same physical limitations of humans and emancipated from the Institute's influence, synths in and of themselves have just as much to contribute to society as any other, and it is merely the short-sighted, narrow-minded ranting of Arthur Maxon which labels synths as the enemy of the Brotherhood rather than the unwilling victims that they truly are. Regardless of whether you consider them human, people, sentient, or simply machines that are imbued with human-like characteristics, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Is there any information, conflicting or otherwise, that we forgot to mention? Leave your thoughts and evidence in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, and we hope to see you here next time on Gray Gaming.